Welcome to day 122 on the trail. We have three readings for today from John 7, verses 32 through 52, Numbers 31, verses 1 through 54, and 1 Maccabees chapter 3, verses 38 through 60. In 1 Maccabees, Antiochus IV has learned of the success of Judas and his relatively small army. Angered at this news and running low on funds, Antiochus leaves for Persia with half of his army to collect tribute. According to Greco-Roman historians, Antiochus died in Persia while plundering a temple in Elam. The other half of Antiochus's army was placed under the command of Lysias, who was ordered to destroy Judea and Jerusalem. Lysias marched into Judea, camping with an incredibly large force at Emmaus, about 20 miles from Jerusalem. Due to the overwhelming size and power of the Seleucid army, slave traders traveled to the army's encampment with plans to acquire slaves from the soon-to-be-conquered Jewish people. The response of Judas to this threat is not just courageous, but demonstrates the characteristics of an ideal biblical warrior. In verse 47, Judas and his soldiers fasted and humbled themselves before God, covering themselves in sackcloth and ashes. They consulted God's law, honored those who had taken Nazirite vows, and protected the symbols of their faith, such as the vestments of the priest. Also, Judas followed the instructions given in Deuteronomy to exempt those from battle who were building homes, about to be married, had planted a vineyard, or were simply frightened. Finally, Judas, along with many Jewish heroes such as David, Joshua, and Gideon, placed his confidence for victory in the hands of God. We read in 1 Maccabees chapter 3, "And Judas said, 'Arm yourselves and be courageous. Be ready early in the morning to fight with these Gentiles who have assembled against us to destroy us and our sanctuary. It is better for us to die in battle than to see the misfortunes of our nation and of the sanctuary. But as his will in heaven may be, so shall he do.'" In our reading today from the Gospel of John, we continue the account of Jesus at the temple during the Feast of Tabernacles. Once the Pharisees realized that people were openly discussing Jesus and whether he was the Messiah, they decided to dispatch the temple guards to arrest him. Instead of listening to Jesus and seriously considering what he had to say, they tried once again to silence him. In response, Jesus tells the gathered crowd, beginning in verse 33, "I will be with you a little while longer, and then I am going to him who sent me. You will search for me, but you will not find me. And where I am, you cannot come." The truth of this statement is somewhat ironic. Christian readers of John's Gospel know that Jesus is describing his death, resurrection, and ascension to his Father. However, those listening to him at the temple are confused and wonder if Jesus is planning to leave Judea and to take his message to the Gentiles. But there are a couple of difficulties with this line of reasoning. First, based on the construction of the Greek text, it appears that they assume that Jesus' message would not be well received by the Gentiles. After all, if Jesus could not convince his own people, then what chance would he have among the Gentiles? Yet, as we will see throughout the New Testament, after the resurrection and the persecution of the earliest Christians, the message of Jesus spreads throughout the entire Roman Empire with tremendous success. At every turn, the oppressive resistance to Jesus' message and the relentless persecution of his followers strengthen and advance the spread of the gospel. Now, there's another layer to the meaning behind verse 34 that goes beyond Jesus' death and resurrection. Again, from verse 34, "You will search for me, but you will not find me. And where I am, you cannot come." In this larger passage, the Jewish authorities are attempting to arrest Jesus while he is clearly and publicly at the temple in Jerusalem. That is, they know where he is. But why are they trying to arrest him in this moment? Jesus is directly challenging their authority, and as a result, they are attempting to silence him. However, if Jesus disappears to a place where they cannot find him, wouldn't the threat to their authority be removed as well? So why would they be looking for him? Perhaps here Jesus is describing a different time, a time when those who are opposing him or who are currently unsure about his message will be actively looking for him. So why would their attitude change so radically? Unless they are facing a situation where they finally realize that what Jesus has been saying all along is actually true. Jesus does in fact have authority from God, authority to offer salvation from their impending judgment. They were given an unprecedented opportunity to accept Jesus' teaching and to trust him and his mission. However, the time will come when that time of decision has passed, a time when they will look for him and cannot find him, a time when they will no longer have the option to be where he is, in heaven with his Father. And this is a warning to us as well. Finally, verses 37 and 38 may sound familiar. On the last day of the festival, the great day, while Jesus was standing there, he cried out, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me, and let the one who believes in me drink. As the scripture has said, out of the believer's heart shall flow rivers of living water." We heard a very similar statement from Jesus during his encounter with the Samaritan woman at the well in John 4. There, Jesus offered living water to someone who was considered an outcast on several different levels. And she accepted, running to her hometown to tell others about meeting Jesus. Now, Jesus makes the same offer in the heart of Jerusalem. The symbolism here is profound. During the Festival of Tabernacles, priests would process from the temple to the pool of Siloam. There they would fill a golden pitcher with water and carry it back to the temple. On approaching the inner court, the shofar was sounded 3 times, recalling Isaiah chapter 12, verse 3, which says, "With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation." The water was then offered to God with the daily drink offering. Since the Feast of Tabernacles was a celebration of God's care for Israel during their 40-year sojourn in the wilderness, this custom served as a reminder of the water that came from the rock in Exodus 17. Also, this use of water was related to the expectation of the living water that would generously flow from Jerusalem upon the arrival of God's kingdom. And now, standing in the temple, Jesus proclaims that the living water that they were hoping for has arrived. In fact, everything embodied in this custom, the presence and care of God, the power of God's kingdom, and the hope for the future, was now available and offered through Jesus. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, stay on the trail.